Welcome to Dojo Talks, everybody. Today we are talking about online versus OTB chess. In my estimation, this is one of the bigger topics, not just for chess, but the broader populace. So I have a feeling we're going to end up talking about this a lot as the years go by. So first, let me just describe how I came to this topic and why I think it's so important. So first, at the beginning of the dojo, even before we had the training program, what we noticed were people weren't taking their time. And so they would just be making horrendously silly moves when they had loads of time on the clock. And at first, it seemed like a messaging thing, like, oh, this is just something we got to tell them. This is just, well, all we have to do is communicate it. And then it became kind of obvious that just saying it's not going to do it. So the first thing there that I want to say, and we could talk a lot more about this, but that developing the ability to sit there and think is a skill in itself. Probably beyond the chessboard, but here we're just talking about chess. It takes a while to develop that skill. A lot of people think that all they have to do is just sit there and they got it. No, it's going to take a little bit of time.
Absolutely. Actually, Jesse, I
Yeah.
mean, I think you guys might not even appreciate how bad it is.
Oh no.
Like a lot of times, like let me explain. A lot of times people will post a position in the Discord, some middle game, and they're like, "Oh, I had no idea what to do here. What do you guys think I should play?" And this huge conversation will ensue about this interesting middle game position, lots and back and forth. And then it turns out that the person that posted that position, they were just playing like a blitz game on the toilet while watching a YouTube video.
Right, right, right.
Right. And it's like, and they just made some move in 5 seconds and they're like, oh, I didn't know what to do. Yeah. It's like, that's
Yeah.
not what happened.
They didn't think about what to do before not knowing what to do, is your point.
Yeah, yeah, it's like you're playing a blitz game. Like that's not, this isn't a classical game where you're sitting for 20 minutes going through your options, you make some decision, then afterwards you want to evaluate. It's like you're like barely paying attention to the game. I'm pretty shocked when I hear actually just how common it is for people to play from their phone, play while multitasking, while distracted, which I assume is just all related to the online aspect. Like we don't have to deal with this stuff over the board, especially like in tournaments.
Mm-hmm.
And my 2 cents to add to how dramatic this is when Jesse says that people aren't using their time, I just want to give some I want to say what we mean by not using their time. I watch people playing tournaments every week, right? And we'll play something like 15 plus 5, for example. They finish the game with 15 minutes on their clock, right? They start with 15, they end with 15. Or you'll see people playing 30-minute games with a 5 or 10-second increment. And again, they're ending the game with 32, 33 minutes, stuff like that, right? That's what we're talking about, Jesse.
Yeah.
Right. And my experience with it has been doing the graduate show. I do that every Wednesday and Thursday. Wednesday under 1,000 and then Thursday over 1,000. And by us, I should always clarify 1,000 in Dojo land means about 1250 chess.com. And it is a rampant problem in the under 1,000. So, okay, but what we did is we did a study, the little Dojo inside study. I want to say this is let's call it a preliminary study because the numbers I think they're hard to gather. I'll talk a little bit about why, but I think it's so important, and I think chess can be used as a guinea pig for this other bigger question of online thinking versus offline thinking. So I have a feeling we could be used as, like a lot of times chess is used as a guinea pig in the world of psychology. For decades, it's been. Okay, so one question I had, okay, going through these games was not only do we have this amazing dojo time graph where I can see really at a glance. It's very important to do it at a glance because then I can just see what the story of the game is at a glance and see, oh, this person hasn't thought at all, right? But then the question became, okay, well, do I think that players who are playing online are going to be playing faster than when they're offline? Okay. And the intuition is yes. But the study, at least the first initial bit, is a little bit more interesting than that because what it showed was yes, online is a little bit faster, but in these about let's call it 99% of players, which is about to 1,800 chesscom, 1,700 FIDE, something like that. Up to that level, players aren't using that much less time when they're online. And so, first of all, it's really important because what I think that shows is that if you haven't practiced that muscle of thinking, even in the OTB space, you're not going to be spending that much more time. And that was surprising to me. So that was just like, oh, empirical study. By the way, I think we can get more numbers. It'll be interesting to find out. Now, one of the things that gets really interesting, we have a graph. I did a video. You can check that out on our YouTube. I talk about all the statistics. But one of the things that's really fascinating there with the graph is that the stronger you are, whether it's OTB or online, the longer you're going to take to think. And by the time you get to the 1900 dojo cohort, which is like 2150 chess.com, maybe a little higher, by the time you get there, the graphs start to look like what I would call GM graphs, right? You have a curve and people, don't think too much in the opening and then really nice slope all the way down. Looks like a GM game. So that's already fascinating. So I'm starting to, especially when you have the dojo time graph as a model, because then you can say like, oh, this is what it should look like. And it starts looking like that, as I said, around 1900. Okay, now here's where the thing with online OTB gets really
And that's
interesting.
even for online. The 1900, 2000 players are using their time pretty seriously in their online games.
Well, here's what point I was going to make about it. So once you start getting to the higher rateds, though, okay, that's when you start to see that their ability to think, to have those beautiful graphs that they get in the OTB world, that in fact, once you start getting to those cohorts, 1900, 2000, 21, 22, it flattens out. So those people, stronger players playing longer games online, they're not able to use their time anymore. Fascinating. And I totally appreciate that when I try to imagine myself playing online.
So
So,
you're saying they play faster compared to how they play OTB.
right. And they don't improve anymore. So if you imagine a graph starting from the bottom, going all the way up, people at the bottom use the least amount of their time, right? But then it goes up, whether it's online or OTB, right? OTB is a little bit better. But then you start getting to 1900 where the graphs look good. Like you take people in our program, for example, I looked at a lot of their games, Nose, Shalikiri. They got these graphs and they're just GM level graphs. I know what a GM level graph looks like. I've seen it enough times. It looks the same. It looks the same. Okay. But
Wait,
then
I'm
what?
confused. So you're saying their
Wait,
graphs look good for their OTB
for
games.
the OTBs. But then you start looking, and this is then what we have, by the way. I'm going to describe a little bit the data. We have a lot better data. This makes sense for online because those times are all tracked. So we can get thousands and thousands of games for that. Whereas OTB, somebody has to, unless you play at a fancy tournament, and that basically only GMs play in fancy tournaments, like the one I played in St. Louis, where the timestamps are already automatically recorded. You're gonna only get it if somebody does it themselves, right? So what I want to stress is, I'm going to call this preliminary data that we have in the video, okay? But it's still pretty good data. I think it shows it's enough to be like, oh, this needs another study. But let me make the point, Kosa, because I want to make sure people understand. Once you get to that 1900 level online, then you go to 1900 to 2000, you don't see a rise in the amount of time they're used. They're still using 70, goes 70, I think it was 75% of their time, 75%. It flattens out completely. Whereas OTB, when you get to 1900, they're already using 95% of their time, like a GM level game, right? So the point is, thinking in chess is a muscle. It takes time to develop, right? Very important, even if if you can't do it right away, to just understand, oh, this is really important for my development that I learn how to think. But then when you get better, you have to say to yourself, oh, wait a second. I cannot think in the same way when I play some online game than when I play an OTB event. Okay, so that's just my beginning spiel. We can take that in whatever direction you guys want, or have questions or whatever. But for me, it's fundamental about chess improvement and probably my life outside of chess as well.
Yeah. I mean, you brought up a lot of good points there. I would definitely agree that working on focus is a really underrated aspect of chess improvement. And it's one that's like, it's kind of obvious for people because they can understand it logically. Like, yeah, focus, of course, that's important.
Mm.
But then they don't actually take active steps to develop their focus or their ability to stay focused for a long period of time. But it's super relevant. I mean, even just on a daily basis, usually I try to do like some calculation work in the morning. Like this morning I did some.
Mhm.
Usually the first problem or two, I'm like still warming up. I'm like getting into it. And then only like 15, 20 minutes in, I'm starting to feel like my brain is actually working. And then it feels like, okay, I'm doing like good chess training. And then same thing happens during the games. It's like you need some time to get into the game. But I think if you don't if you don't work on chess in general, like, or you just do it very sporadically or kind of inconsistently, then you're like, you're never even developing that ability to like stay with one position for any amount of time at all, which I think is uh, super important. I mean, that's an exercise I've actually just given to students when I feel like they have this issue. I'm like, just sit at a position for 5 minutes and don't move anything, and just think about the position, right? And then write down your thoughts, the thoughts afterwards, right? And yeah, for a lot of people, I would say you have to build up to it. Like if you've never thought with a position before, then after 1 minute, you might be driving yourself crazy. So I would say start with 1 minute and then work yourself up to when you can spend 10, 15 minutes on a position. And I think people always have this question like, um, do strong players spend more time, like because they have more to think about, or do people that spend more time end up becoming stronger players? I think it's kind of like both. I don't know what you guys think,
Mm.
but I feel like
Mhm.
because a lot of lower rated players they always have this question because they don't know what to think about. That's their issue. It's like that's why they play fast because they say like I don't really know what to think about. I just see a move, it looks good, I play it. And strong players, of course, we have a much more developed thought process. We have candidate moves. We've seen typical structures, typical positions. It's like we have so much more information to work with when it comes to breaking down a position for analysis. But I would say on that point, it's just like, yeah, it's just something you have to work on. Just start wherever you're at and just try to improve little by little.
Yeah, I mean, I get that question all the time, Kostya. I mean, I got it on my broadcast, about an hour or two ago. Somebody asking, so when somebody thinks 15 to 20 minutes, what are they thinking about?
Uh-huh.
Right? And so, yeah, in terms of your question, is it that people who think longer become stronger, that stronger players have more to think about? I do think it's both, but certainly it's like a process that goes step by step along the way, right? And that's how it gets there. So first, you need to take time to think. Then, you start finding things to think about, or failing that, you have to do some study and expose yourself to other people's ideas. If for whatever reason you don't generate any, right? You could always read some chess books, get overflowed with ideas that you don't know how to measure them against each other, how to judge them, etc. Now you've got too much to think about. You're headed toward time pressure, right? Um, but little by little, you learn more, you get better, you use more time thinking about the things that you know about. Um, Sometimes you know a lot of stuff that allows you to play a move quickly, right? Because you've developed like instincts or enough like comparisons that you're like, oh yeah, in such a position, like I know for sure that I'm playing on the king side, not the queen side. You just know that, right? So that just cut out half of your candidate moves or ideas or directions, right? And so you're just focused over there. So the two grow together.
Mm.
Yeah. And to Jesse's other point, I think, yeah, this isn't exclusively a chess phenomenon. Like I 100% do a lot more work inside of a gym than when I'm working out at home. It's like for obvious reasons. It's like you went somewhere, like you're there. I think it's similar with like OTB compared to doing like another question is like whether you should be studying OTB versus studying online. My general answer is like if you want to play OTB tournaments, you should be doing some form of OTB study quite regularly. If you don't care about OTB, if you're just exclusively an online player, then playing online is completely fine. But yeah, it just feels like that offline experience is a bit deeper because it's
Mhm.
not like we don't have that immediate engagement. You don't have like the puzzle mode where you just have to input a move. If you're solving a puzzle offline, you have to look at the position and then basically you have to tell yourself, okay, I'm done, and then you look at the answer. Or I would suggest like writing down your full solution and then
Mhm.
reviewing the answer. But yeah, that definitely feels like it leads to just a much more yeah, much deeper experience that feels like it would lead to more improvement in the long run.
Yeah, there's some weight with writing down answers, right? There's something about that that like feels really heavy compared to even executing a move on an online board doesn't even feel as real as writing it
Hmm.
down,
Hmm.
committing yourself to it, then scoring your paper at the end.
Couple anecdotes I wanted to roll by you guys that I thought were really interesting in terms of this. Okay, number one, um, we had the Queen's Gambit generation. Many of these people got very good in terms of their online rating. They maybe got a very high puzzle score or something like that, right? So they were able to like do well. They were able to win the prize in terms of Blitz Chess. And by that I just mean like whether they got to like 2,500 on Chess.com or 1,800, either one of those would be an accomplishment. But what I've seen, whether they got to 1,800 or 2,100 or whatever, what I've seen is when those same players go to play OTB, they get crushed and they don't understand it. Now, the first narrative, and you hear this a lot on our Discord, the first narrative that pops up is, oh, I just wasn't prepared for the three-dimensional view. And at first I was like, oh, that makes sense. These people are all just two-dimensional. They've never done a three-dimensional view. But as I was reflecting, I was like, no, no, no. I mean, there might be something small to that. But what's basically happened is it's a completely different kind of thinking when you're on the online space versus the OTB. You're doing a totally different thing. And so let's state the obvious. When you're online, you're getting pinged from all kinds of areas all the time to take your attention somewhere else. Even if the little notification, you don't see that thing go off in the right-hand corner of your eye. Even if you don't have that, your mind has already been online so much that it's used to. It's used to when you're in front of this screen. I'm speaking for myself, but I'm pretty sure of others too. It's used to just darting all over the place. So it's very hard to hold that attention focus while you're there. Whereas OTB, you're going to be playing some person who's going to be able to do it a lot better than you because you've never done it before. That's to me like a first really big insight because that's a whole generation of players. And honestly, in our training program, we've seen many of these players just get booty smacked when they go play in the OTV, and they expect their rating to be like really high, commensurate with their online rating. But in fact, in my experience, it's usually about 200 points lower when we normalize it with the dojo rating.
Hmm.
Yeah, I
No,
mean, I
yeah.
think there's a couple of factors there. Sorry. I mean, it's like the 2D versus 3D thing. I think that is relevant. Like
Mhm.
because I grew up playing OTB and then I switched to online chess when I like joined ICC for the first time. And then
Mhm.
I definitely felt like I had to get used to the 2D board coming from the 3D version. But I think that's part of it. I think the other part of it is a huge part. I mean, like you mentioned, the focus part, they haven't developed that. But I think that's mainly related because online players are playing a lot more blitz than classical. Like just way, way, way more blitz than they are playing classical. The few players that do play serious classical chess online, I think they have a much easier time transitioning to OTB because they are used to that, like just spending more time but even for them, it's still hard because, well, I mean, there's just like physical differences. You have to write your moves down and you have to hit the clock, which
Hmm.
you don't do in online chess. Just that alone is difficult for players to get used to. And then
And
we're
it's a
not even
different
talking about the
environment
people that are
around you.
um, drawing arrows. Like there's people that are just addicted to drawing arrows online, and then
Mhm.
it's kind of like a meme. But yeah, those people that they also struggle OTB.
Yeah. Or Kostya, just the environment, right? Because the difference between being in your room where you can control like all the variables, like if you want it quiet, quiet. If you want to listen to music, music, like, however you want it set up, you've got control. And then suddenly you're playing in a tournament hall and somebody's eating chips, or your opponent gets up, walks around, and stands behind you. and they're just standing there the whole time
Mhm.
while you're playing, and it knocks you off your game for one game or something like that, right? I mean, imagine you took a bunch of OTB tournament players, like all of us, and you took us all down to, I don't know, an outdoor market, right? Where people are calling out, fish for sale, spices, come get my spices. And we just we're sat down there and play a tournament against, a bunch of, people who are used to playing in Washington Square Park or something, right? Like
Yep.
we would suffer from a change in environment as well. Think of all
No,
the guys who are
absolutely.
like, shh, shh,
Yeah. No,
and suddenly
I
you
find
put
it
them
much
in a new
harder to
situation.
play in like the public space when people like talking and trash talking. I'm not used to that at all. I play way worse
Yeah,
when that's going on. Or the other example would be now with like the new esports chess championships with the players playing like the noise with the noise canceling headphones. I
right.
feel like I wouldn't be comfortable playing like that my first time.
Yeah.
Whereas an online player probably feels totally fine. Oh yeah, yeah, I'll put the headphones on.
So any environmental change could really have like a big impact, at least
Yeah.
for, the first one or two tournaments. Of course, most of us adjust to some extent, but when Jesse talks about somebody going OTB and getting hosed, I think the 2D versus 3D, I think there's any number of the environment, there's any number of these possible explanations that could partly explain that. And I personally am not sure that there's any reason that somebody who's trained to think deeply, to think for a great length of time, to concentrate on a game for 5 or 6 hours, I don't know that there's any reason they couldn't develop those skills through online training or at home training. I don't see a reason that someone from the Queen's Gambit uh, generation or era of players wouldn't be able to successfully transition to OTB chess if they'd trained correctly. And we see lots of people in the dojo who play slow games and use their time. Um, every Friday night at Friday Night Fights, I see players rated 800 who sit down and play a classical game and use 90% of their time. And then they come back the next week and they do it again. And I'm not sure, Jesse, whether you think those people would have a real problem going to OTB, or if you think as far as this concentration skill, do you think that they would not have properly built it up?
Okay. So, first, I'm going to make the contention, right, that it's not a 2D versus 3D thing. I was sold on that. When I heard that first time too, I was like, oh yeah, that I'm sold on that.
Yeah.
I don't believe that at all. I think that's a kind of a thing, but I remember playing Blitz on ICC. Sure, it maybe takes you a momentito, but you're going to get in there pretty fast. It's just a board. But I do want to say several people in the dojo at the lower cohorts have been able to figure it out. Most have not. I just want to stress that. You look at the graphs and it's very clear, right? But I think there are some strategies. Maybe we should mention those here. I think this e-board phenomenon, for example, I think that's great. If you can get up, even if you don't have an e-board, I think if you just set up a normal board and somehow, somehow have a way for the board to tell you when your opponent's made a move, because once you start looking back and forth, then you're already forget about it there as well. Um, so what I strongly believe is that once you're online, there's a kind of multitasking thinking that is not going to allow you to think deeply about what's going on in front of you. You are going to be distracted. So let me just stress, OTB, you're sitting there. It's hard. It's hard to think in a pressure situation and completely drill down onto the position. There's distractions there too. It's very difficult. But in the online world, where you are encouraged to be distracted, horrendous. And I know I've said this a lot on other podcasts, but the framework I'm using is definitely the Kahneman framework of System 1 and System 2. So System 1, multitasking, you're walking down the street, you're talking to somebody, you're looking at the cracks to not fall over, you're looking at the weather, you're doing all kinds of stuff. It's a very important kind of thinking. I don't want to degrade it at all. That's what we're doing most of the time. And in fact, even when we're playing OTB, it's not like you can think deeply all the time. Not only do you have to take a break, but some positions you're just going to have to have an intuitive feel for it. You're not going to be able to calculate everything out. So what I'm trying to say is, I don't think it's possible to think in the same way in the online space. I just don't even think it's a thing. I think
All
you're
right.
fooling
Let
yourself.
me ask you another question then. So
Yeah.
I originally trained OTB, right?
Hmm.
Only later learned to play online. And I will sometimes play, training games online because it's hard for me to travel to tournaments nowadays,
Right,
right?
right.
So I'll call up somebody. For example, I played like a Fisher random match against Panda once
Uh-huh.
online, right? So we set up the game, we play classical time control. I put my real board here on the table with me. I make my moves on it. I write my moves on a score sheet, but
Yeah.
then I also enter my moves on the computer,
Got it. Yeah.
right? Is that fact that there's a computer on the table, do you think that's enough that I'm not playing for real?
Well, you're definitely playing for real. But I'm going to go ahead and say that the quality of your play is not going to be as high.
Yeah, it's a bit of it's a time it does pull something away. I've suggested to people to actually set up games on their phone or their iPad. So you just use that device to like enter in your moves. So you're
Mhm.
not tempted to like look at the computer screen and that you play things out over the board. But still it's a little bit you have to kind of go back and forth. And it's definitely not ideal. Panda's a grandmaster, by the way, in case people weren't.
As GM Josh Fidel, friend of the dojo. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But on the esports thing, I do think that is a very interesting um, venture because I do feel like online chess actually has quite a number of advantages over OTB chess that we should definitely voice.
Sure. Yeah.
Specifically, that's like mainly that it's global, so you can easily run a tournament with 1,000 players, thousands of players online, and people from all over the world can participate. Which, of course, they don't. Not everyone has a chance to play big OTB events. You have to basically have the means to travel or live near one. Whereas online chess, people can play from all over the world. So I've often thought that online chess is kind of like the future because in the long run, that's how we get the most number of people actually playing chess. I have concerns obviously because with online chess comes the huge problem of cheating. It's going to be much more easy to cheat online than OTB. So I don't know how online chess is ever going to deal with that issue, but in an ideal world, we would have like tons and tons of online tournaments, like serious online classical tournaments, so that people can like train from their house without having to leave anywhere. And I think part of that could be like e-boards. I'm not sure how long actually e-boards will be along. I think at some point we'll have the technology that you could just play with a board and we'll just have like an AI sensor. You can have like any camera, your phone camera can just translate that. I don't know. So I don't know if e-boards are going to be a thing forever. Maybe we'll have cheap e-boards in the future, but I do think e-boards are a very cool idea because that's what allows people to get that OTB experience from their home without having to go anywhere. So it's way more convenient, much
Yeah.
cheaper, and
Agreed. Yeah.
yeah, all that stuff.
Another one I'll just voice because I've been suffering all this last week. I was knocked out with this flu. And why? Because my fourth round opponent from the weekend before last, that kid was coughing all game long, dude. I sat next to that guy for 5 hours and he was coughing. Oh, I was like a death sentence for me, man. That was
Yeah,
one of the
OTB
worst
chess
diseases.
sucks.
So this is not to say, I'm not actually saying that OTB chess is better. I'm saying it's stronger than online chess. And right, and one of the cool things about this conversation is if we recognize what's going on, then it's like, oh, we can develop strategies to develop it.
Hold on for a sec.
I
So I mean, stronger in like classical chess, like you play better, but
You
not
play
necessarily
better.
stronger in like blitz chess.
Okay, so with Blitz Chess, this is the next thing I actually wanted to bring up. Blitz Chess has been amazingly popular since ICC. I mean, it's been popular. We loved Blitz Chess even before the days of the internet. I'm the one person to remember that on this planet. Okay, so Blitz has always been fun. And one of the amazing things about Blitz, online Blitz in particular, where, by the way, what's the most popular? It's 3-0. 3-0 is by far the most popular. And what's interesting about 3-0 is it is the perfect speed where you never have to think. There's always going to be It's going to come at you fast enough that you can't get distracted. You can't start looking at what's going on. You're not going to go look at the news, your Twitter feed when you're playing 3-0, right? It's just coming way too fast.
Yeah.
And so,
Is 3-0 the most popular though?
oh yeah. Oh yeah. You
I
try to
mean,
put, what do you think is the most? I think it's, well, by the way, time out. Let me just say this. Amongst the GM crowd, for
right.
sure 3-0.
Yeah,
Amongst
yeah.
amongst the overall, what I know is that 10-0
Right.
is the most popular, like at the lower cohorts.
Right. I was gonna say like, yeah, yeah. Among the masses, 10-0, I think
Yeah, I agree with
is the
that.
more
Yeah,
popular one.
yeah.
Um,
But 3-0 for the GMs is very interesting. You think about it because this has been going on for decades, and no GM that I know of is like, oh, I'm really looking to play at that online classical tournament. There has never even been an online classical tournament. We've had, oh, just hundreds and thousands of hours of 3-0 Blitz, though. And
There
that's
have
like,
been classical tournaments online.
I
I
get
mean,
it.
not a lot, but not zero.
But what I was trying to say is none of my GM friends are like, oh, boss, you heard about this tournament? We're gonna go play this online tournament. You want to go
Yeah,
play with
no.
me? It's just not a thing.
But
And
like Continental Chess Association during the pandemic was running some of their tournaments on ICC,
right.
some of the big opens that you're used to.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I'm just trying to say, like, for the GM players, 3-0 is that perfect thing where I can tune out of my life completely and I'm just all in and playing 3-0.
yeah,
Anything
very
more than
addicting.
anything more than that, and then that a recurrent input isn't there, and I'm going to be distracted. And that's why I think, okay, that GM play has never it's never developed. There's no GMs I know are on the regular playing classical chess online. That's just not a thing. And for me, I can tell you just personally that it's because I know I'm not thinking as clearly when I'm online. By the way, being online,
Have you tried it by the way, Jesse? Like how many games did you play before concluding that you couldn't think normally?
I'll tell you where it really hit home, David. And this is a thing between you and me. You've been pissed at me about this, and so here's my time to explain it, buddy. Okay. So we developed this amazing online puzzles, and David did a couple, and he wanted me to do one. He's been like, "Boss, have you taken it yet? Have you taken it?"
Mhm.
So for me, oh, by the way, puzzles, like deep puzzles, hard puzzles, right? The kind that David created, are very much a system two thinking thing in the same way that playing an actual game is. So for me, to do something like that requires incredible focus and energy. There's an anxiety to it. There's like, can I find it? Can I find it? And I'm working and I'm trying this idea and that, and I cannot. If I feel distracted in the slightest, it just pisses me off, and then it gets like a self-anger recrimination thing.
Mhm.
So when I tried to do it online, I was forget about it. I was instantly, I was like, no, I'm done. I'm done.
You tried it?
Yeah, I was like, if I find a way to maybe get the PGNs for all these things, set it up on my board, and then have time at the end to come back and enter it into the module,
Oh.
then I
I
could do.
didn't even know you'd opened it up. So you opened up my test and then just rage quit?
No, yeah, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. So again, by the way, there's nothing wrong with online thinking. There's like for example, in our Discord here, somebody's sending me a message. There's this, boom, 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 boom. It's happening. It's a cool kind of thinking. It's the same like you're driving the car and the kids are yelling at you from the back. That's a very important kind of system one thinking. We need it to survive. But like a couple times in my day, I want to be able to think deeply, and that could be like playing a game, analyzing my games, maybe doing some kind of deep puzzle. The puzzle could not isn't just tactics. It could be like, what's the best move here, kind of thing. And that is going to involve this deeper experience that honestly feels a little bit spiritual to me, where I need that focus. And
So,
I don't find that at all when I'm doing anything online.
well, also, Jesse, I think that's because you've never done it. So when you say you don't find it, it's because you've never done it. It would be like me saying I've never found treasure while hunting through sunken ships in the Pacific,
I have found a
right?
lot
I've
of,
never done it, so I've never found any treasure.
I
You've
have,
never played a classical game online.
I
Your entire
have,
experience is that you once opened a puzzle that I made for you and didn't find the answer and quit. That's your experience playing
no,
classical games
no,
online.
no. Obviously, David, imagine. I've done a lot of chess work online. Of course, I've done a lot of opening work. You can imagine that. It wasn't just using the computer, but I
Sure.
was thinking about stuff, trying to think about it deeply. That's very
Mhm.
valuable work. I don't degrade it. Um, and of course, I've done a lot of puzzles online. The best example would be that survival thing where the puzzles get kind of hard at the very
Yeah.
end. But I know from experience there too. It's and there it's interesting. It's
Right.
almost better.
But to clarify,
Can I
but to
finish?
clarify,
Can I finish? So when I
you're
find
just dodging, so you're not
no, no,
finishing
I'm not.
anything.
I'm not dodging. I'm trying to say something. When I'm doing those kind of harder puzzles, it's even easier for me if I'm streaming because that focuses my attention a little better. Because if I'm not streaming and I'm doing those things, when it gets a little hard, there'll be a little moment of detachment. There'll be a little ping or a zing, you know, that's
Yeah,
going on in the side of my screen.
you have to push through, Jesse. That's the exact same thing people feel when they're doing it OTB and they're like, ah,
Yeah.
this is boring. I don't get this. I want to make a move. You got to push through.
Okay, and what I'm
It's
trying to
all about
say
pushing through.
is that there's no pushing through. And the data beyond the chess world, the data beyond the chess world supports this. The data
Okay,
beyond the chess world is saying nobody,
but give
it's
us a
not
clear
happening.
yes or no, Jesse.
Yeah,
Have you ever played a classical time control, more than 90-minute game
no, no,
online? Never.
I wouldn't do it either.
Jesse never played US Chess League or anything?
Okay, good point. Yeah, I played US Chess League. I want to
Yeah,
say
that's
something
easier.
about US Chess League, though. Those were faster games, right?
Yeah.
David, help remind me. That was like a 30.
It was usually 45 to 60 minutes. Um,
Yes, I remember that.
with
Yeah.
with an increment probably.
Hmm.
So it
The
was,
seasons I played, it was like I remember one season was like an hour 15,
yeah,
and I
there was
remember
a
they like
season when it was, yeah. The
lowered it,
time control
but I
changed over
thought it was
time.
pretty like there was well, I don't know when you guys played, but I played uh, a handful of classical games
Hmm.
online,
So,
and
so I have done that, David.
Okay.
And I
I'm
remember actually the distraction there vividly. I remember it vividly.
yeah, no, I definitely lean more towards on Jesse's side. I don't think it's impossible to get focus in online, but I do think it's just decidedly more difficult. Now, I think when people play online, they should try to find a way to kill off all distractions. So whatever kind of computer you have, you need to find a way to put in like do not disturb mode, so you're not getting pinged from like Discord and like all this other stuff. I think that's like just a starting point. But even if you had that, it's like just the experience. Like imagine the chess.com screen. They have all like the tabs on the side, and it's just like it's just I don't know, it's distracting. OTB, you just have the board. There's not a ton to look at. There's not a lot of bells and whistles. Um, yeah. So my feeling is that like OTB, I think it's easier to go deeper. And so if I'm going to solve like a really difficult puzzle, like an endgame study or something, I would much rather look at a OTB board than a screen.
Mhm.
I do feel like though I'm faster calculating on the screen. And I don't know if it's just my perception, but I feel like, if you give me a simple tactic OTV or a simple tactic online, I'm going to find it much faster online.
Well, let me preface my opinions by saying that unlike Jesse, I don't know the answer on this. Okay. But I think that we're all here pretty heavily influenced by our own personal experience. I suspect that people are different and that there are some people who do one task better or worse in one circumstance and other people in a different circumstance. I don't want to pretend to be sure about it, but that's like a first guess that I would have. I see Jesse as a certain experience and then a certain position about whether or not people can concentrate online, which I think lines up perfectly with his own lived experience, but I don't know that there's any true data for it. I have a personal lived experience that's different than his. I think that I concentrate perfectly well while playing online classical games against other people. I've played dozens of them. I took the US Chess League very seriously, which Kostya brings up. I prepared for those games. I played really hard. I played for several seasons. Um, and at some point, they sped up the time controls, and then with Pro Chess League, it became really just like 15-minute chess, and I lost my interest and taste for it because I'm not so trained for that kind of. speed, and because I like to have a lot of time and I like to, some people probably like to do things quickly and other people like to do things slowly, and that's going to change their adaptability. Then you say something interesting, Kostya, that there's like something that you feel you do better online in calculating speed, right? And some other things where you feel like you get a better concentration more easily, OTB.
Right.
Makes me wonder if there might not be some element of like where specifically did an individual train a specific skill. So like if I did all my endgame studying on a board and all my opening study on the computer or something like that, might I be better at playing the opening on the computer and the endgame on the board or something like that, right? Could there be an effect where it's not just that one scene or the other or one environment is better, but it's like your training, right? So because I think that I do play a little bit better OTB, but I think it's like a fairly small amount. And I think part of it is just like a natural reaction that something like kicks in when I'm in a certain environment, right? Like I've spent so much time at OTB tournaments, I feel them in a certain way. And when I hadn't basically played a real tournament in 10 years, I'd played some little local stuff here in Berkeley, right? Basically, for 10 years, I had not played an open tournament in Europe with one game a day, classical time controls, etc., till we went to Sitges, right, Kostya? And within like a day, it was like my body was just like honed to everything I'm supposed to do. When to eat, how much to exercise, when to like cut off the walk and head back to the tournament, every single thing, how long to chat with somebody before, oh, it's time to, get into my own headspace. And like everything suddenly becomes optimized in a way. And so there's some clicking into things that are based on the environment around you. It sort of like tells your body what mode to go into. And so I think there's like a small discrepancy, but I think for me it's very small because I've spent enough time online and whatever my natural inclinations are, I think I am able to focus and concentrate online. So I could imagine there's somebody who trained playing online and it worked well for them, and they might concentrate better online than OTB.
Well, let me
They
just
come
say,
OTB and it's a new environment. It's not where they trained.
David, on this, I want to say you said I already know the answer. I want to say with this topic, I feel like this topic has so much to give in terms of potential answers that I have more questions than answers. And so let me just put out a couple of things that I feel I don't know. I don't know, like, I'll say I'm sure that some people are more adaptable in being able to think online than OTB. But I don't know how many, and I don't know. Although I think there's going to be a discrepancy in your play, I don't know how much it is. I just know it's there. I don't know how much it is. Another thing that's really interesting that I don't know is there's this thing, increasingly new word being thrown out there, internet use disorder. At various points in my life, I feel like I've had that thing where I'm just unable to stop touching my phone in some situation,
Mhm.
maybe some social anxiety or whatever, and you're just like looking at something instead of dealing with the social situation. And I see it all over the place. I see so many people aren't able to engage because they have to touch their phone. And then
Mhm.
what the article I'll link to here is the this really fascinating thing that there's a very strong argument to be made now that, and this is where I feel like data still has to come out, that because we're online all the time, it's changing the way people think. And so even now, when you go from the online world to the offline world, it's not like they are mutually exclusive places because your mind has already been doing a lot of habituation in the online sphere. When I say you, I mean the general you, all of us, right? And so when
Yeah.
we go to that offline space, oh, our mind is already trained to work a little differently than it was in the past. That's another thing that I'm not sure of. I also feel like I have real questions about ADHD and how that has been developed with internet use disorder. There's a lot of statistics around that are like, oh no, our minds are truly changing. And something like ADHD is not just some genetic thing, but it's like, oh, we're doing this to ourselves. And I'm certainly, man, I was sick this week and I couldn't think. And I was just devouring BS media, and I just feel nasty now, dude. I just feel nasty, and I can tell that I got that internet use disorder bad right now. You know,
Yeah, the kids call it being too online
being
when
too
you're
online. Yeah.
you're too also it's like a psychological thing, like you're too invested with what's going on, like with stuff you're getting tagged in or like notifications. Whereas like if you just deleted that app, you would like your life wouldn't change. You just wouldn't care about it at all. I thought David brought up a very good point about the environment, which I think is huge. And there's a lot of advice given out to like people that work from home, and they need to like set up your home working environment to be very conducive. Like you're not supposed to just work from your bed, essentially. It's like that's not how to be the most productive. You should have like a separate working space and some kind of ritual so that your brain knows like, okay, when I go into this space, it's like it's for work. And then your brain does a very good job of kind of like preparing itself for that kind of uh, work. So I totally buy that there would be people that have developed the ability to kind of focus and concentrate more just like from their room with no one around, like with their computer or whatever, compared to like, yeah, playing OTB with another like human being in front of them and then other triggers and stressors there.
You know, David, I was realizing we could do a very simple experiment here. I think it's pretty basic, actually. If you played a significant amount of uh, online games, right,
I have, yeah.
and in a similar time frame, played because we don't want to take games from 10 years ago or whatever, right? But
Right.
in a similar time frame, played some OTB. I don't like those accuracy scores.
Right.
I don't care too much. But for this case, I think they would have some validity, right? If you had a big enough sample size, even if it was just 20 games from OTB, 20 games online, I would
Right.
be really interested to see what the discrepancy is there, you know?
Yeah.
And other people could do that themselves. And that's honestly maybe a thing we could do dojo wide, because it would be really interesting to see what that discrepancy is.
Can I suggest another experiment? Because I think
Sure.
that's a good experiment and you
Yeah.
could run it as long as you're using the same number, whether it's the chess.com accuracy, lead
Right.
chess thing, chess
Yeah.
base, you still get a same, similar thing. But another experiment would be to give Jesse 20 of your games and not tell him which ones are online and which ones are OTB games, and then have him
Mm.
guess. See if
Yeah.
he can pick out the ones that are
Right.
uh
You could also use maybe like cent upon loss as the measure because I think those accuracy things are
yeah, I
weirdly done.
think that's what lead chess does. They do
But
the
the
same.
accuracy thing is based on cent upon loss, right? I mean, that's all it's doing.
I I just think it's like something where you can't trust the counting because they're like, yeah.
In any
It's
case,
weird because it depends on the opponent too. So it's
Mm.
like low-rated players can get a higher accuracy score because they're playing with another low-rated player, but then they just happen to outplay. So it's weird. It depends on the opponent's
But I
skill
think over
level.
a big enough data set, that's not going to matter, you know? Yeah.
Well, it would be the same measure. So I think it would at least make some sense. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah.
Interesting to see.
Yeah, I mean, you'd have to take a bunch of people who have a tournament in a certain week and have them play, like two games online the week before their tournament and two games the week after their tournament, and then you would, run some.
Well, especially if you could do a data set of 50 people,
Right.
maybe across different cohorts. I mean, screw it, 1,000 people, and you got some really interesting data. Um,
And
yeah.
we're also talking about games because David, you said you mainly play with a physical board and then you just enter in your moves online, which is a little bit different than playing the full game staring at your computer.
Sure. But honestly, I don't think it would make a huge difference to me to just play straight onto my computer.
Well, see, that's a beautiful thing, David, because I completely disagree. But we could test this. This is something we could test.
Yeah.
Sure.
For me, it's more just like the eye strain. I don't know. I just don't want to stare at a screen for that long, especially if I'm
Right.
like really like focusing. Like
Yeah.
OTB, I'm just staring at the position where I'm trying to burn a hole through the board, trying to figure out
Hmm.
what to do. When I do that against the computer, it's
Yeah, yeah, it hurts your eyes, right? You
not
just have to
pleasant.
do a little bit more like Ivan Chuk style or something,
Right.
just like calculate on your ceiling.
Exactly.
But like I'll say this, like I feel like I can feel if I'm in flow or not, and I can feel whether or not that like that gear has clicked in, right? In myself where it's like I'm just giving everything, like I'm looking for anything, I'm just so determined, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like when I play online, maybe there's a small difference, but I still feel that like those two basic things are there, right? Like there's flow and there's determination. Like I feel both of those have like clicked in, and like I don't really I don't really need anything else to tell me whether or not that's there. Like I know it. You feel it. It's pretty obvious, right? Just as Jesse, you feel that it's not there for you, right? Um, your own experience, I think you can pretty well gauge in this question.
Yeah, so I mean, first, of course, it would be interesting for you to see that difference. And also, it would then maybe provide the beginning of a spectrum of some players who are less immune to it than others. In general, yeah, I think maybe you have some kind of gift. I don't know. Maybe you do, buddy. I don't know. Yeah.
I mean, it's just different settings, right? Like I also can't care about like the Blitz games that other people do care about, right?
Well,
So,
this is the reason, David, though I guess I'm fundamentally like on the side of calling bullshit on it, though, because what the Kahneman studies proved was that regardless of how good of a thinker you are, let's say before a match, and by the way, when we say match, I just mean some kind of thinking. If you are exposed to some kind of emotional, hey, you had to talk to your girlfriend, didn't have to be that big of a deal, but some kind of little emotional talk. If you are exposed to that before your match, we can empirically prove that your level of thinking is going to go down. If I make a random sound during your thinking that you might not even recognize, you might not even think you're disturbed by, your level of thinking will go down. These are all things that are empirically proved. So why you would be immune to all this, I think is naive. Now, are some people maybe better at tuning it out? Yes, but there's nobody who is immune from these things that invade our system two thinking.
it's pretty clear there's some difference between you and me, though, Jesse, just in terms of whether or not we even want to do it. We've obviously had very different experiences, right? Just
Yeah,
from the fact that I still want to do it and enjoy it, right?
fair. No, I definitely believe there's a difference in how I'm not saying that it's possible to do it at a reasonably high level. I'm just saying I don't believe that it's possible to do it better online or the equivalent online as you do it to OTB, right?
Mhm.
That's the only claim I'm making.
Yeah. And I think there might even be somebody who does it better online versus me, right? Because
Uh-huh.
they even started out training there, whereas I started out OTB.
Uh-huh.
And I didn't play classical online games until I'd been playing for many, many years already over the board.
Yeah. Well, like I said, this is why I feel like this is very interesting for the chess world, and also for the world outside of chess. And again, the world outside of chess has always used chess as their little psychological guinea pig for all kinds of memory tests and this kind of stuff, right? And so maybe they'll use this again on this one. I kind of think they
Mhm.
should. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I agree with some of what you said about, the internet use problems, right? Like, I understand that there are many parts of the internet that are built and designed in ways that mess with your ability to concentrate, right? Or that pull your attention into silly directions, maybe. But I don't think that that's the only way the internet could be. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like there could also be, there's no reason there couldn't be a bunch of tools on the computer that foster concentration, the exact opposite, right?
Mm.
I think that would be possible.
Yeah, there are tools for sure. There's this one app. I don't use it, but I like the idea of it where it turns your phone into a little garden, and while you're in focus mode, you have a plant that grows. And if you then use your phone for something, your plant stops growing. So it only grows while you're like locked into that app. So you're not using your screen and you're doing so it's
Uh-huh.
kind of like a little timer, but it gives you this little like, oh, I'm growing a plant while I'm not using my phone and being productive.
Yeah.
So it's
So
trying to gamify not playing games on your phone.
yeah. So there are cool tools and stuff available.
Yeah.
By the way, I think this was just a hypothesis, but I think one of the reasons there's online cheating is you're playing a game, you have more time than you know what to do with, and your finger has already been habituated to click all around. And all it takes is just one time. You click on that engine just one time, baby, just one time. And then a whole thing starts. And so I think that's part of the reason of how it happens. It happens kind of just because people are distracted and they're like, oh, I don't want to wait for this person to move. In the dojo, by the way, we get people playing games with people and they've signed up to play, let's say, a 45-45 game, 45 plus 45. And their opponent will start yelling at them, dude. They'll be like, move. What are you doing? What are you doing? You're driving me insane. And they get
Yeah.
rage at them, dude. They start raging. And I
No,
think
it's a problem.
it's those same people are going to be like, well, I'll go click that engine over there. I don't have what else to do. I'm curious. What does the engine say here? Why not? Yeah.
Yeah,
Or they'll just go post their position in Discord, right, Kostya? When you first told that story, I was like, and then it turns out they were still playing or something, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
you're
oh
sitting
yeah,
around
people
so
have
long and you just like go post a position like, I had this position like today, like what do you guys think of it? And you're just like sitting there like
no, that's happened too. They'll post a position from like earlier. It's like, oh, it was like 3 moves ago. Don't
yeah,
worry.
yeah, three
Um,
moves to go. Don't worry, I'm not cheating. I can't wait for the game to be over to
yeah.
talk
Or
about the
actually,
game.
a lot of times people do it innocently.
Yeah.
They just think their position is cool, or they really like the move they're about to play, and so they just post it.
No, no, I'm assuming innocence here. I'm just saying it's like it is that inability to wait that's going
Yeah.
on, right?
Yeah, exactly. Which I think is important. The other thing with online chess, a lot of times people play classical, and there's also like there's kind of like the soft cheating where they just have their like Chessable course open to the side, and then they just like
Mm.
review it as they're playing. I mean, it's cheating, but it's not like stockfish cheating. It's like they're
Right.
Chessable cheating
Right.
essentially.
Well, it's stockfish
Um,
only to move 12 or whatever.
Yeah, and it's like okay, you can't really prove that, but it feels quite apparent because you'll have players that are, let's say, sub 2000, and they're playing like tons and tons of theory moves, much deeper than you would expect them to know.
Especially in a blitz game where you can't like recall your like you can't take the time to recall lines.
Yeah, I mean, I was talking about in classical, like it
Classical, okay.
seems to happen that players are like really well booked up, and it's because they have a lot of time and maybe they're bored, maybe they're who knows what's going on. One thing we didn't mention about the OTB chess that I think is also relevant, there's all these factors. Also, it's like the stress and anxiety of tournament competition, being in front of other people. I think that's definitely a big factor for a lot of folks. Might find it just easier to play at home, and then they're not used to the in-person experience. They get nerves.
Yeah. I mean, there's all kinds of factors about the environment that could be conducive or harmful depending on the person, right? Like there's the fact that you've made an investment maybe to travel somewhere to play
Yeah,
that tournament, right? That might make you play better because you take it more seriously. Could also make somebody play worse because like they're nervous. They're like, I spent so much on this. If it's not going my way, like what did I do it for, you know?
right.
Um, like when I was a kid, I'd be sitting there, and if the tournament's going badly, I'd be like, "Oh shoot, I didn't do my homework, and now like I didn't even win the tournament." Like,
Yeah,
I have to go
yeah,
home
just
and
wasting
admit
my
like my
weekend.
homework's not done. You know?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, guys, I think we'll probably revisit this. I want to at some point. We'll get a little bit more data at some point and talk about it. There's a lot to talk about.
Yeah,
All
good
right.
stuff.
But a good point that I think we can all agree on and that we can offer up is that it's like very good to work on these cognitive skills, right?
Right.
Like you want to be able to focus. You also want to be able to be observant and notice lots of things and not be totally focused. Like you want to be able to switch between different mental modes at appropriate times,
Right.
right? You want to have different skills and tools and the ability to sort of recognize the situation and switch between them.